The history books 200 years from now are still going to be talking with a view that AI was continuing to develop at historic rates. This particular oligarchy that we're talking about, they have tentacles far beyond the core underlying technology that they have built.
This is like fundraising therapy. I need it. All right.
That's 90% of the job of an investor in the first place.
Welcome to AI Truth Serum, your antidote to the hype and gloom of AI. I'm Greg Shove, your host. I'm a 7-time Silicon Valley founder and CEO, and currently CEO of Section AI. My goal is to help us all understand what's really going on and what we need to do in this moment to leverage AI and not be disrupted. Today, I'm talking with Juliet Bailin, a brilliant young investor. Juliet's a venture partner at Kindred Capital, a venture capital firm working with early stage companies. She's previously worked at General Catalyst, one of the world's preeminent venture capitalists and investors in AI. And that's how I first met her, as General Catalyst is the lead investor in Section AI. She's currently working on her own venture fund startup in stealth mode, which means she's still figuring it out, but will launch soon. She's got a great perspective on all layers of the AI stack. So to help us understand where the money is in AI, let's welcome Juliet Bailin. Hey, Juliet, great to see you again. Where are you today?
Great to see you. I am home in London, England. Thanks for having me, other side of the pond.
Yeah, I got to ask, what part of London? Where are you?
I work in Fitzrovia, which is the quote unquote cool place for VCs to live now instead of Mayfair. God bless us. But I live in Chelsea, which is a beautiful and inconvenient part of central London.
And does that mean you are a Chelsea supporter? I have to ask.
You'd think 7 years into living in London that I would have picked a football team. Unfortunately, that has not been part of my experience. I pass the stadium frequently, but I can't say that I have any affinity.
It's good that you haven't chosen, because that would be the wrong choice. I'm going to tell you right now.
There's only Excellent.
There's only one choice. The team's called Arsenal. They're in North London. That's the team. And just tell people you've been supporting the team for about 7, 8, 10 years, because we sucked for a lot of years, and now we're great again.
We're better now. Phenomenal.
We're much better now. Yeah, I don't want to look like you're jumping on the bandwagon. All right, it's Arsenal for life.
Arsenal
okay.
It is.
Yeah, so I have to ask, because you have the job my wife says I should have. You had the job, and which was you were a partner at General Catalyst, at really one of the preeminent VC firms in the world, and certainly one of the most active AI investors in the world. Why the hell you leave? Like those jobs are hard to get. And I thought once you got them, you basically just stayed for life. Forever. Yeah. What happened?
So many different factors. I think the world of General Catalyst, and as the team there knows, I'll forever be a stan on the other side. GC is a very entrepreneurial place. And so I don't think it's surprising at all that it has led to a lot of people leave and build their own things in and around the venture ecosystem or startups themselves. And that's been true since the early days of General Catalyst, right? Thrive came out of GC and many other great funds. So I don't think this was surprising. Also, from a personal perspective, both my parents have started companies. So frankly, from my family side, they are shocked it took this long to leave and start to build something on my own. So I think there were many pieces of that. And I mean, we can have a whole separate conversation about how the venture ecosystem has evolved, in the decade that I've been a part of it, and certainly in the last many decades. But when ecosystems like this gain more authority and impact and it create more enduring value, it also leaves vulnerabilities in the system. And that's why more companies get built. That's why different funds get built. And so that's the part of the experience I'm on. I agree, though. What an unbelievable place to get to spend time. I wouldn't have traded those years for the world.
So what are you doing now?
I'm building something that is technically in stealth, but also isn't, in that we're spending a lot of time with LPs and GPs.
What's LPs and GPs and all that? Just explain that for the audience.
Yes, of course. So an LP is a limited partner. These are the institutions, endowments, family offices, and others that invest in venture capital funds. And
they're the sugar daddies.
Sure. I'm sure they would love that moniker.
There you go.
The general partners are the active managers of venture funds. They're the investors themselves. I have a phenomenal co-founder who's been on the LP side for the last decade. So he and I are two sides of the same coin. And we are building a new type of venture fund that's inspired by multi-manager hedge funds like Millennium, Citadel, and D. Shaw. And so We are thinking about the generational talent shift in venture. We are thinking about the incentives that LPs and GPs have and realigning those. I realize this is pontificating, but I promise we'll have more to share soon.
All right, let's talk about AI, because this podcast is called AI True Serum. Let's zoom out and start with the bubble. We're in a bubble, it would seem. I guess that's at this point an obvious statement. Sam Altman plans to spend over $1 trillion apparently over the next 5 years building out just the compute that he needs for OpenAI. And of course, others are doing the same. Do you agree? Are we in a bubble? And more importantly, does it matter to the rest of us?
I love that second part of the question because I don't think enough people are asking it. So this is where my history hat comes back on. I don't love the use of the word bubble in this particular moment because it harkens back to two other huge bubble and bubble bursts, which were the dot-com bubble and the 2008 financial crisis. The reason why I think this moment is fundamentally different than those two is because in those moments, the perceived value of the underlying assets people were so hyped up about was significantly different to the actual value that was being created, right? The websites that were created at the turn of the century had very little value. The packaged mortgage-backed securities were much less valuable than they were sort of sold to be. And so the reason the bubble burst is because suddenly a lot of people realized that the thing under the hood was really uninteresting. And thus, right, it led to a significant macroeconomic crash. In this particular case, yes, the valuations of these businesses, both individually and the sector writ large, more reflect retail investor enthusiasm than it may necessarily be underlying fundamentals. But if you look under the hood of these businesses, the value being created is substantial. The technology is very, very real. And that is why this is, to me, fundamentally different. So I'm not necessarily thinking, is the bubble going to burst as suddenly we're going to realize that LLMs aren't real or that the way people are using AI is fake, or right in the case of sort of other moments in sports history that we've seen. But I do think about when you value an industry or companies like this so highly, that does create certain vulnerabilities in the economy. And so what are they vulnerable to? And I realize I'm coming at this because I just finished the book Chaos Kings by Scott Patterson, if you've read it.
Okay,
so
I have not.
I'm in that mindset. I strongly recommend it. It talks about Nassim Taleb and other hedge fund folks who think about the inevitability or predictability or lack thereof of black swan events and other things. And so in this moment in time, I'm thinking a lot more about what shocks to the system could lead to an issue. So I'm thinking much more about our reliance on energy infrastructure. I'm thinking much more about geopolitical risk and the relationship that the US has with China. I'm thinking a lot more about our reliance on the grid. Which companies have true value for the long term and which ones are vulnerable to what external shocks? And then, of course, if you're an investor and you're thinking about wealth, or you're an individual thinking about your career, based on your risk profile, you can make decisions, right? And hedge your own personal or investment strategy based on the companies, their vulnerabilities, and the likelihood of certain external shocks happening.
So let's just bring this right down to ground level fast on one dimension of this, which is if I'm an individual working in a big company thinking maybe this whole AI thing is going to blow over, that we are in a bubble, it will burst, and these tools aren't quite ready for prime time. And the bubble bursting will mean these tools don't get ready for prime time as fast as everybody thought. And I can kind of wait this out a bit or kind of like hunker down and let the AI thing blow over. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely not. No.
No, right.
I think that's setting yourself up for failure. The speed question, the timeline question is one that I couldn't possibly answer for you, and I don't think anybody can. How quickly things are adopted or the speed at which they transform either industries or companies, et cetera, that remains an unknown. But the AI tools themselves, the value of LLMs specifically for certain tasks, right? For not necessarily for reasoning today, even though they love to say they can reason, they cannot fundamentally yet, but for summarizing a lot of information, for search, for coding, the cat's out of the bag, or whatever the proper cliche to use today is.
The genie is out of the bottle. Yeah.
Correct. Thank you. So hunkering down, in my opinion, would be a mistake.
Let's go back to the bubble. So it burst. Do we care? Do the rest of us care? Like one take on the bubble bursting is a bunch of venture capitalists and private equity guys lose a bunch of money, and who gives a shit about them anyway? And that the rest of us need to probably keep our heads down and figure out how to use AI and make ourselves more productive, more efficient, and more economically valuable. When the dot-com bubble burst, that early e-commerce bubble burst, Amazon was not deterred, right? They put their heads down.
The internet didn't disappear.
Right. Internet didn't disappear, and Amazon just out-executed for 10 more years and grabbed a whole bunch of market share. Well, everybody else was licking their wounds. Is that what's your sense of this bubble bursting and what we should be doing about it, if anything, as kind of everyday investors and or knowledge workers?
Yeah, I think, again, to the point on bubble and bursting, I think these large valuations there might be some sort of external shock that leads to either retail investors losing excitement around this and valuations plummeting, whatever. And to me, that's really when you think about generating wealth in this particular environment, that requires some level of hedging strategy. And, whether that's fully accessible to the average consumer versus to businesses is sort of up for debate. But if I think as an individual, even if there is a huge shock to the valuations of these companies and the stock market plummets, et cetera, AI isn't going anywhere. The speed at which it is adopted may change. Which industries it impacts when may change. But fundamentally, I don't believe that if there is some level of geopolitical situation or war or something happens and suddenly we have to throw way more investment into physical infrastructure versus AI and compute, or there's an energy crisis and our access to electricity significantly goes, or whatever happens, even if that happens, the history books 200 years from now are still going to be talking with a much more forest versus trees view that AI was continuing to develop at historic rates throughout that time.
And is that the biggest risk right now in terms of sort of the industry or the business, which is the speed of adoption? We're still a small number of consumers. And when you think about the total addressable market, but still lots of people love AI. Businesses seem to be slower. And the technologies are advancing at a rate that businesses kind of can't keep up and can't really deploy. Is that sort of where the revenue risk is for these companies, OpenAI and Anthropic and others? Is that they can't get companies to pay for enough of this yet, just because organizations are slow, big, and risk averse?
It's funny as I think about all the enterprises I've spoken to, and when I say enterprise, any large company across industries, right? This is the most broad term of business. A lot of whether or not they adopt it and how quickly has to do with how much they trust their own systems and their own employees. Do we actually know where our data lives? Is it true and accurate? If we decide to use a private cloud and fine tune a model with our data, will that tell us anything real about our business? And then with individuals, do I believe if I put AI tools in front of my employees, will they use them in a compliant way? Will we increase our security risk as a business? Those are sort of the top of mind questions that I think a lot of businesses have. The one thing, though, that's really fascinating, because innovation is happening so quickly, and yes, adoption is happening faster with this particular technology than I would argue any in history. But the gap between innovation and adoption is still very wide. And I would argue this is a huge benefit to businesses, because when you say something like, oh, well, technology is moving so fast, it makes it impossible for enterprises to think about how to adopt it. Actually, it means that a lot of flaws in the technology are being solved before they even wrap their heads around their own strategy for leveraging it. So by the time enterprises are putting it into production, it's probably a lot better than whatever is the reason why they called that emergency board meeting 6 months prior. So I actually think that's going to be a huge benefit to most companies. But I do think that adoption and innovation are still widely far apart.
And based on what you just said, though, it would seem that better run companies will do better with AI. Like you talked about, do we trust our employees, and do we have good systems in place? Is our data in the right kind of shape, and is it secure? It just feels like to me, AI sort of exposes all those weaknesses and or sort of accelerates those strengths. And I again, curious if you agree that
I think that's spot on.
Right.
Yes. I mean, I love talking about Oracle in these moments because they have done a phenomenal job. This is a business that was very late to the cloud game. And then you have Clay, who's now their co-CEO, built out their cloud infrastructure business really from very, very little. They doubled down on the depth of their enterprise customer relationships. They doubled down on the proprietary data they had access to. They have created very meaningful partnerships with innovative leaders in the space. They have done an extraordinary job. That is a very well-run business. And Oracle's been around for a very long time. So I think your observation is exactly right.
All right, go Larry Ellison. And he's the, 77 or something? But you're saying it's his guy Clay?
He is the one who built the OCI and has a phenomenal, his co-CEO is equally excellent. But look at their team across the board. And they have pretty high senior retention, which is also a great sign, right? Because that shows the resilience of the actual business itself, because those are the individuals who own the customer relationships. When individuals who are quite senior leave, that's where things break down. What
I love about this is like they were ready for the moment. I think that applies sort of up and down the org chart, right? Be ready for the moment. And it's clear they were. If we all are, we'll be in better shape. Look, listen, my business partner, good friend Scott Galloway, thinks the AI industry is like the airline industry, great for consumers and will be a shitty business. And there will not be the kind of investor returns, at least at that sort of foundational model level, the OpenAIs, the Anthropics, and so on. I disagree. In fact, I invested in the last OpenAI round. Of course, I had to pay a premium because it was remarketed from somebody else, but I put some money into that $300 billion round that's been closing all year, essentially, hoping that they'll IPO at $1 trillion and I'll get a 3X and prove Scott wrong. What are your thoughts? Is this the next airline industry, or is this going to be the next iteration of big tech when there'll be a few winners, winner take most, outsized valuations, great returns for investors and my family? What's your prediction?
Two brief sides of this. And by the way, I also invested in the latest round, albeit through a closed-end fund. So I got a bit of a discount, but nevertheless, at a valuation that I think anyone can argue.
This is the advantage of living in Chelsea. I think living in Chelsea and working in Fitzrovia.
I don't know. Who knows?
You guys are all hanging around the right bars or coffee shops. And here am I paying 20% premium. Okay.
Well, I think we're both quite fortunate because we're thinking like investors in this particular case, which is that regardless of the valuation that we entered, we believe that there is so much retail enthusiasm that when this company chooses to go public, or when this asset becomes available to public investors in like a closed-end fund, that the value will increase and thus we will generate a return. And I think that is a fundamentally different question than perhaps the one, Scott mentioned, although sort of along those lines, I tend to agree with you, primarily because of the evolution that we've seen with these companies, even in the last 12 months, right? So when these businesses started to gain enormous public traction, it had a lot to do with just the fundamental large language models that they had created and were putting into the public, whether they had to pay for them or whether they were open source. What has been changing is these businesses are now creating much more, both infrastructure software and application software, to generate value for both consumers and for enterprises. Look at Claude Code out of Anthropic, right? A year ago, I think most of us were just talking about Cursor, which is still a phenomenal product, a highly used product, a beloved product, but is not the only one on the market today that engineers are using every single day. The same is true for some of the, agents that OpenAI has released. And that puts pressure, of course, on startups because differentiation now requires you to think a lot more differently than you had to a year or 2 years ago. But that's more why I think this is less like the airline industry, and that a plane is a plane and it gets you from point A to point B. And the products you can have on a plane are pretty limited to first class,
pretzels, peanuts,
premium economy, right? Pretzels. Right. Do we charge you extra for baggage? You're not, right? And I'm not an airline industry expert, so I'm sure someone who is would come on and say, actually, there's so much more variety and thoughtfulness or whatever. And you look at new airlines like Breeze in the US and there's innovation happening. And I'm sure that's true. But from a very high level, this particular oligarchy that we're talking about, they have tentacles far beyond the core underlying technology that they have built, which is still extremely valuable. And I would not bet against them, is probably the simplest way to put it.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I've also been really impressed with the management teams, particularly OpenAI, just because I probably track them more than Anthropic. I just think that when you think about the challenges being thrown up in front of these companies that they have to solve, right? To your point, everything from energy supply and chips and how to build these data centers, quickly, all the way through to the applications, and then the impact of these applications on society, on humanity, and the threat of legislation. And just like every day, it seems like they wake up and there's some sort of problem, existential problem almost they have to solve, and they seem very adept at it. Like I'm just impressed with the management teams.
I would extend that also just to the teams that they are building. Something that I've been really impressed by is, I've got friends at all of the major players. But when I think about, a close friend of mine who runs startups for OpenAI here in EMEA, the way she talks about the people she works with, and when they have town halls, the level of sheer mission-driven energy across all levels and departments is visceral.
Yeah.
Right. When they get calls, and I also know many people have gotten the call, would you come join our team for $100 million? Why people are saying no, right? People are making theoretically illogical financial decisions, right? These are life-changing amounts of money because they feel like missionaries as opposed to mercenaries. They deeply believe in what the companies that they're working on are doing. And so that to me has really been quite astounding. The same is true for Anthropic. And you're seeing that in a lot of some of the emerging startups, right? Folks who work at the 11 Labs and Lovables and Synthesias and Hugging Faces of the world. There is an energy about the entire organization that didn't exist before. And so perhaps that's due to the management setting that expectation top to bottom. I've been very impressed by it at all levels.
Yeah, and it's one outcome is this 996 work culture.
Oh.
Right? I mean, I think that's what's going on. Is that what's going on, or is that is that narrative?
So you're working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. Perhaps this is because inefficiency is one of my greatest personal pet peeves. If 996 is the most efficient way for you to create the most value, awesome. If you're just at the office 996 and playing foosball, you're not fooling anybody. If you're working 24/7, that also probably means you're not sleeping enough and the quality of your marginal decision becomes worse and worse and worse over time. So if a founder says to me, we're 996, my first thought isn't, wow, you guys must work so hard. My first question is, how do you spend those hours?
Right.
How are you spending your time?
Right. And are you creating value? Right.
How
really
are you
working.
creating value? What is the output?
Sure.
You guys, you could work 3 days a week for 2 hours a day and add 10 million of ARR every week if you want. I don't know. I mean, I don't know a single business necessarily doing that today, but yeah, I'm less enthralled by the headlines.
But back to what you said around this energy and commitment around mission, and that, hard to describe or value, but if you can bottle it, right, it's so powerful. That would imply that everybody else, it will be at a sustained competitive disadvantage if they can't harness that same kind of energy and commitment, right? If you think about any incumbent, maybe Google's done a decent job inside a DeepMind of recreating some of that same kind of passion and energy, but it just feels like for everybody else, they don't probably realize what's going on. If you work in an adjacent competitor, you're probably not getting the fact that this is what's going on inside of these new companies. I call them super companies. And these super companies are just behaving differently on the inside. If you're a SaaS company, for example, and you get in the crosshairs of a super company like OpenAI, and you're a traditional software business, I think you're in a lot of trouble pretty quickly. And you might have, you got a lot of customers, you have data, you have obviously advantages of an incumbent, but you don't have this sort of energy and specialness. I think that's not obvious to many.
I think that's true. And it's both for legacy businesses and startups. I mean, look at one example, Synthesia and HeyGen. There was a period where both those businesses with the same sort of, if I say same product, I think both founders would say, absolutely not. We don't have similar products to the market, right? Sure. To some companies, you could argue they might be interchangeable. I don't know if that's true. But I think what is undeniable is that the team at Synthesia, the culture they built and their ability to out-execute simply to build a maniacal sales team and customer success team and think about what operating a fundamentally well orchestrated business at scale, they did that and they focused on that and the results speak for themselves, right?
So they crushed HeyGen then? Is that what's going on? Or they basically...
Their revenue is significantly greater. Their growth is higher. And again, I'm not saying, I know that there are very talented people at HeyGen. I do think there are lessons, though, to learn, given both those companies were at the same place at one point. Yep. And so it won't only be how innovative is your product when you can shape how and when and how quickly enterprises are adopting what you've built.
I love this. I'm listening as CEO of Section because we've built a software platform that a year ago didn't have competitors. We now have competitors. And
Thank
so,
goodness. That means that your market is large.
Is that what you think as an investor? That's a genuine question. Like, if I was the only vendor in the category, so to speak, as an investor, would you be concerned?
Probably depends on when you invest. I think at Series B, I'd be very concerned.
Yeah.
Whereas at seed, I mean, when Airbnb was started, there was no other Airbnb. And granted, I am not a consumer investor. I don't even have TikTok, so I cannot opine, but it probably depends on when. But yes, because for a market to be enormous, there has to be enough demand that there is more supply than just N of one.
Mm-hmm. And what's the right number? Like what's enough and what's too many? No, I'm serious. Like if I said like I got three competitors, well, you feel good about three and about seven's too many?
The problem with that is it assumes that the market size that exists today will be the market size that exists in 10 years.
Sure.
And as a venture investor, I have to believe the market will grow, which also means the number of competitors might. So I couldn't tell you. The correct number of competitors today versus the correct number of competitors in 10 years is probably also two different numbers.
Yep. But let's talk about that for a sec. As an investor, is that the number one thing you're thinking about? This market will be 10 or 100x bigger in a decade than it is today, right? And maybe the entrepreneur,
if it even exists.
If it even exists, right? And maybe the entrepreneur doesn't even see that. Have you ever invested where you see a bigger market than the entrepreneur does?
I've never invested in a company in that way because if I believe more in a business than a founder does, that's not particularly inspiring.
I didn't say believe more in the business,
more in the market.
You want the entrepreneur to share the same delusion as you in terms of the potential market size.
Absolutely. Any early stage investor is asking founders to hold two things at once. One, I'm building a product that people need right now and will solve a problem that exists today. And I have a vision for the future that I'm going to shape with this company, not just build for. I'm actually going to shape what the future looks like. And that's a very hard thing to do, obviously, because one is practical and one is visionary. But at the early stage, founders have to be able to do both.
So this is why, Juliet, I get this feedback when I fundraise. And my current Series B deck, the board, which includes a couple of General Catalyst guys, this is the feedback I got. This is too Canadian, Greg. You're not being big enough. You're not being bold enough. You know, I like to make promises I can deliver on, right? I'm comfortable being sort of out over my skis somewhat. By the way, I use GPT. I put the Series B deck into GPT and Claude to take the Canadianness out and make it more American, which was really helpful because I think it is an Achilles heel for me in terms of sort of understating the opportunity, understating our ability to kind of seize the opportunity. So
I don't doubt. I know who's on your board, and I don't doubt that their advice is true. And having spoken to you a number of times, I'm sure that is true. And I think the key here is
having spoken to me a number of times, you're sure what's true, that I'm like, I got this too much Canadianness in me?
The Canadianness, for sure. Absolutely. I mean, if you think about what Section can build, and I'm not here to do your pitch for you, but in a moment in time where the vast majority of human beings need to completely rethink what they know and how they work, what you're building undeniably has value. I will let you sort of share the full story, but I don't doubt that at all. I guess what I would just share is I don't think you are ever going to be comfortable bragging the way that the venture capital industry asks of you, but you should do it anyway.
Okay. Love it. Good advice. This is like fundraising therapy. I need it. All right.
That's 90% of the job of an investor in the first place.
Juliet, you mentioned that Claude Code has accelerated dramatically in the last year, which means I think Anthropic really has accelerated dramatically in the last year. In fact, today, I think they're forecasting $70 billion in revenue and a bunch of free cash flow by 2028, which I don't think OpenAI is suggesting any free cash flow in 2028. So Anthropic looks like a good bet. In fact, I was allocated some of their recent financing as an investor, again, through some sort of remarketed SPV. And then we were cut out at the end. There wasn't room for us small fish. You mentioned sort of a duopoly potentially at this moment. What's your take on how concentrated will this industry be in terms of winners? Are we looking at another sort of round of only a handful of big, important, valuable companies that we all want to invest in or be part of, and frankly, who are going to be really influential on our lives? Or can this be a moment maybe where we can break out from just a couple, three into a few more? What's your take?
From an LLM perspective, I do think it's still an oligopoly, right? And I don't necessarily see that changing enormously. I think the players that we're all aware of, and that includes the Googles and Microsofts and Amazons and Mistrals and others who sort of are focusing on that particular part of the stack, I think they will continue to remain at this level. I think it would be very hard for there to be different companies. That said, when I think about where value will accrue, I spend a lot of my time, both from my time at General Catalyst and also as a venture partner at Kindred today, thinking about the physical world and how AI will have an extraordinary impact on everything from space to industrials, manufacturing, a lot of areas that perhaps have been historically, quote unquote, unsexy, but actually introducing a tech stack into a less tech savvy environment is somewhat simpler than trying to layer on more technology onto a lot of tech debt. And so when I think about the companies that will have extraordinary value to enterprises and to consumers, I think it will extend far beyond the LLMs themselves. And I think that there are going to be new companies that are building new types of AI models, not just transformer-based models, that will impact our lives in ways we can't imagine, that will lead to the type of AGI perhaps we talk about, or the level of sort of robotic sophistication that folks are starting to see in China versus in the Western world. So I do think that specifically in LLMs, we are staring at the companies that will, quote unquote, matter. But in terms of the companies that will, quote unquote, matter in the coming decades of our lives, I think some haven't even been founded yet.
Julian, I just saw some chart, pretty interesting catalog of the 10 most valuable companies in the world, public companies by sort of technology era, basically 20 to 25 year sort of, time frame, right? And what was interesting about it, I think that was like 80 years of data, so it went back, or maybe 60, but basically only two companies had prevailed in the next generation. Shell Oil was one in previous generations, and then Microsoft actually. But Microsoft's the only one that recently is able to carry over, if you will, to the next sort of era. What would be your prediction today in terms of the era we're entering into? Let's assume it's the next era, right?
Right.
The era of AI. Google, right. Microsoft, Amazon, those are Meta. Those are probably all four companies, right, that we know today that have been around a while that are clearly in that top 10. Which ones, if it's only one or two, if you had to predict which ones make it and in 20 years are still in the top 10?
Microsoft, for sure. The other one that I again would bet against is actually Amazon.
You would not bet against that?
I would not. People think, oh, Amazon, Amazon.com. Okay. It started as a book business. It's now an e-commerce giant. AWS is an enormous part of their business. Their partnership and investment in Anthropic, right? These are the things, when you think about what companies have been able to endure beyond the sort of 25-year bucket in which they were built, it has a lot to do with their ability to iterate and evolve, both the types of technology and customers and what's happening in a macro environment, et cetera. And Microsoft has done an exceptional job of that. I think Amazon is also doing an exceptional job of that. And granted, because Google doesn't have to worry so much about antitrust right now, I think they're in a very good spot. And they have some unbelievable technology coming still out of that team. And it's not just DeepMind, although that is a particularly talented set of folks. But think about, isomorphic labs that came out of Google, et cetera. So when you think about these businesses, not only as sort of the core of what they are originally known for, but the ecosystem that they have developed and the technology that they have pioneered, then you could say, well, that's actually multiple businesses. It's not that the original business was able to transcend one generation, but it evolved. I guess you can justify it in any way, shape, or form. But I think we'll see more companies transcend the generation in which they are founded than we have in the past. I think the paradigm will shift. I don't think every company will. I actually think a quote unquote transformation like AI does leave a lot of companies very vulnerable, which is a point you already astutely made.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's probably why Zucks is looking a little desperate right now, I think, right? Meta's behavior has a whiff of desperation about it to me, in terms of they're seeing the future and maybe they don't see their place in it as much as they'd like.
I only understand this anecdotally, right? And I'm nowhere near the board level of that business. They could be so far and away more brilliant than I could ever imagine because I don't have all the data. I simply hear from folks I know who work there. I know from folks who have left to join other companies. I know the, mercenary versus missionary debate that everyone's been having around talent. And I think there's a lot of proof in the pudding at that level today that something more significant needs to happen and that mission can be a much greater driver of success long term. But whether or not you're short term greedy or long term greedy or have the privilege of being one or the other based on how retail investors are thinking about you is dependent on the actual business.
Yeah, listen, I hope they find the mission. Here's why. I think we need safe AI. And I think when you have AI built by mercenaries, I think it's likely to be less safe. And so I do hope the companies that are building significant AIs that we're going to use every day, I hope there's a good amount of mission inside of them. And that mission is not just about making money. Obviously, they have to profit maximize and build great businesses and return investor capital. But I also hope part of that mission is, good and safe AI that does benefit how we live and work, because we need these AI companies to take that seriously. I really think we do.
I totally agree. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive, by the way, right? The safest AI will be adopted more. People will spend more money for that to reduce their risk. Think about how sophisticated phishing has become, right? The safer AI systems are, the less risk that they put a company in front of. And so I think those are very closely intertwined.
Good. I hope so. I do. Okay. Lightning round, Juliet. For the audience who are trying to figure out how to thrive economically in this age of AI, I'm just going to run through some options and just get your immediate reaction, your kind of one-line reaction. I want to do a startup, and I don't want to raise venture capital. I want to bootstrap an AI startup. Do you like that idea?
Excellent idea. Excellent idea. Don't hire too many people. Get real customers. Get paid. The cap is perhaps lower, but the ability to generate meaningful wealth for you and your family is very high.
Is very high. I agree. Okay, start up with venture capital. What are table stakes here? Or how should I be thinking about this? Do I really need a $10 million or $15 million seed round? If so, why?
Not every business should be venture capital backed. Being a venture capital backed business means that you are going to create an outcome that generates outsized returns for a venture capital firm. So if a venture capital firm wants to 3 or 5 or 10x their own fund, the investment they make and the ownership they have in your company has to be worth that amount, right? And so people always say every VC wants to return a fund. This is not one sentence, by the way. I'm so sorry. If their fund is $1 billion, then and they own 10% of your company has to be worth $10 billion. And so how many companies are worth $10 billion in the world? Not all that many. If you want to found a company and you want to either be that or zero, right? Because that's how much VCs care that you either try for that or nothing happens. That's the level of risk you're taking. Absolutely go do that, but recognize what the incentives of the capital investing in you are and make sure you are aligned with the same incentives.
So your dad at 65 thinks he has $1 billion business because he's raised venture capital.
Absolutely. Yes, he does.
Okay. All right. Good for him. Love it. All right. An AI services business, find maybe an existing business or basically don't try to build an AI product. It's hard. The ecosystem's moving all the time. It's just like way too competitive. Pick a niche, build a service that helps people use or adopt or deploy AI. How's that sound to you?
There's nuance in that last phrase of your question, which is important. Use, adopt, or deploy, right? I think deploy is the key word here. If you are simply going in as a quote unquote consultant and thinking about that from a strategy perspective, I don't think that's enormously valuable. But if you're thinking about that from an implementation perspective, the forward deployed engineer paradigm that Palantir arguably pioneered, that is enormously valuable today. Not only saying, here's what you should use, but let me help you figure out the best way to use this. And I will make sure your employees can use this, et cetera, et cetera. That's where the value lies.
By the way, forward deployed engineer, is that just an engineer that's put at a customer site?
Yeah, people used to call them
systems engineers or sales engineers.
Exactly.
No?
Right.
It's good narrative.
Phenomenal narrative, which matters. It really, you cannot underestimate the power of storytelling.
I get it. I agree. No, we have forward deployed transformation consultants at Section. So we sell people 50% or 100%, so in a fraction or a full, and they are deployed into clients to help start the transformation in terms of, lead these efforts. Okay, and we call them forward deployed transformation consultants.
Adoption of Section will be faster because of that.
Absolutely. No, we love it. Get into an AI winner. Like take any job, redirect your career to any AI company that you think might be one of the 100 winners in AI. So sort of suck it up maybe and take a demotion, if you will, or not such a fancy title, because I think these companies are flatter in some ways and aren't handing out sort of VP titles, but get inside of an OpenAI or an Anthropic. I know we all can, but what do you think of that advice? Pick a winner and get inside of it.
If your goal, which I think is true for many people, is to surround yourself by the smartest people and by a network of humans who are innovative and incredibly hardworking and at the forefront, absolutely yes. For that reason alone, regardless of whether or not the value of that business from an economic perspective is going to accelerate or not, find the hungriest, most talented teams. Those are people who will be in your lives and careers a lot longer than you will perhaps be at that company.
Okay, all right, here's the next one. Buy a company and AI-ify it. And I know General Catalyst is doing this, Thrive Capital, I'm sure a lot of others, right? A lot of private equity guys in particular are looking at old line businesses and saying, why don't we buy the law firm and turn it into an AI sort of native law firm, an AI-enabled law firm? What do you think of that idea? And does that scale up or down, maybe in terms of buying a very small
I think
service business?
You can't just add AI is the key, right? So this is still, it's like, search funds or traditional private equity strategies. There's still some financial engineering and other operational efficiency that you have to identify within these businesses. The difference today is a lot of that work was to streamline cost to create value. What AI is able to do, especially if you think about customer service or legal documentation review and contract review and other things, yes, you can still reduce cost even more significantly, but you can also create new revenue generating opportunities in a way you couldn't before. And so I don't think it's a get really smart on AI, go buy a business and add AI and bam, you have immediately created more value. I still think you have to think about the fundamentals of what it means to go and transform a business. AI is a part of that strategy. It is not the strategy in itself.
Do you think that there's going to be this giant deflation, if you will, on knowledge work because of AI? So that fundamentally, the McKinseys and the law firms and the management consultants are going to be impaired over the next decade in that clients won't pay as much for this fancy, expensive advice than they used to?
Well, I don't think they will necessarily pay for rote work, right? Drafting an NDA, for example, suddenly to the average bear seems relatively straightforward. Critical thinking, however, industry know-how, nuance, loopholes, all sorts of things that ChatGPT can't know unless it has found it on the internet, which is unlikely at scale for some of these industries. That's where value lies. The law firms that I have been most impressed with are embracing AI and able to work with more clients and actually get paid more because they're spending more time on the critical thinking and more difficult work than they are on the contract review that actually even today they couldn't already charge that much of. And so I think not being afraid of cannibalizing a part of your business to create a much bigger part is hugely valuable. And to your point earlier, right, the best run companies are going to think that way.
Yeah. All right, last one, which I think is most of us. Just AI-ify myself, right? Become the AI-enabled marketer or software engineer, or, whatever role that we're in now. Just sort of catapult myself perhaps to the top 10% of my team. Is that where am I safe, Juliet? If I'm in a team of 100 people, where's that line that I need to be above that line so that for the next 5 years, I can keep my job, my livelihoods not at risk? Do you think that's at 50%? Is that at, where's the line in your mind for the average knowledge worker in sort of a language intensive job or function inside of a company?
And a 5-year time frame, if you'll just hold me to that, because if I had a crystal ball, I'd already live on my own island. In a 5-year time frame, again, if you think about the gap between innovation and adoption, and that adoption is happening, again, faster than it ever has before, but still quite slow. If you can be a top 2% performer because you not only do your job, but you are adopting all this technology and you're making yourself more efficient. And whether you work 9 hours a day or 4 hours a day, you are more effective than the vast majority of people you work with in your role. You are more valuable, full stop. And you will continue to be more valuable both within your organization and elsewhere. And I strongly, strongly recommend anyone do that. Beyond 5 years is anyone's guess.
Okay, but hold on a sec. Holy shit. You're saying in the 5-year time frame, I've got to be in the top 2% of my team? 2%? That's not going to be easy for most people.
I would argue most people are very capable, but also most people are relatively either uninspired or this isn't their primary priority, right? Their career or work.
Sure.
We live in the little tech bubble where everyone we know and meet cares deeply about what they do and work and et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of people in the whole world who do not feel the same way. Sure. And so I would actually perhaps the devil's advocate is I would actually encourage people, whether the actual number is 2% or 5% or 10%,
No, I get it.
couldn't possibly tell you. And it probably depends on your role and the size of your team.
Yeah.
But I would say actually what it takes
it won't be that hard.
It
won't be that right. It won't be that hard is what you're saying on an average team.
Is to be perhaps a little bit naive and assume you can do it and try.
Yeah. Okay. I love that advice. All right, let's zoom out before we close, Juliet. Remember, though, let me do a little pre-close. The pre-close is thank you. And remember, Arsenal's the only team that you support.
Got it. That's
Arsenal,
my main takeaway from today.
Do you look good in red?
I love wearing red. Is that their primary color?
Yeah, that's their primary color. Okay. All right, let's zoom out. It does feel, I think, for most of us, that this future is being architected by a few people, not exclusively, but mostly in Silicon Valley, who are hell-bent on creating a future where the machines are going to be smarter than us. And apparently these machines will solve a lot of problems for us, which would be great if they did, right? Cure cancer and solve the energy crisis and so on. But we don't have as much agency as we'd like, I think. When I talk to people, when I talk to employees, when I talk to average people working inside of big companies, they're being told, use AI, use it all the time, get smarter, become more efficient. I think they hear that as train your AI replacement. And so I just feel like there's a lot of anxiety and a feeling of loss of agency in what's about to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. And I would like your advice on how should we think about that? How should we retain some agency in terms of how these technologies impact our lives, both at work and at home? Have you reflected on that? And if so, what can you share with us?
My therapist, and I strongly recommend everybody explore therapy at some point, especially in transformational moments like this. They're very personal, but she'd be very proud for me to say perhaps this particular answer, which is something that I learned on that side of my life, which is to practice radical acceptance. The moment you believe that you can control more than you actually can, the harder these moments are. And focusing on what you can control, accepting the reality that it is, accepting the fact that, your manager is coming to you and saying, you need to use AI. Okay, that's the reality. I accept that. What can I control? I can choose to do that. I can choose to go to a place that doesn't care if I use AI. I can choose to go to have a job where AI is irrelevant. I mean, you mentioned becoming a plumber. You could go and do that and recognize that you're making a choice, and that if you stay at an organization where adopting AI is a top priority, that is a choice. And again, I recognize that in a lot of industries, hiring and job seeking is incredibly difficult. And so that's probably a very privileged point of view. And not everybody feels like they have that choice, but practicing that level of acceptance and accepting what you can control and what you can't control, even just from a mental health perspective, will allow you to exist in a moment like this in a much more curious way. And it's a ridiculous thing to bring up a television show, but I don't know if you watched Ted Lasso.
Of course.
You might remember there's a great scene where he's playing darts and he beats the antagonist in that particular scene.
Yep.
And his point is, if you had been curious as opposed to judgmental, you would have asked me and found out that I played darts growing up, et cetera, et cetera. And taking 2 steps back and just thinking about that phrase, if you can approach what's happening in the world with curiosity as opposed to judgment, instead of thinking, what does this mean for me? And how will this, change my life in all these negative ways? And what don't I understand? And what's going on? And instead think, that's interesting. I'd love to learn more about that. I wonder why that's happening. I wonder why power is perhaps consolidating in these businesses today. Wonder why this technology is so fundamentally transformational. I'd really like to understand more the likelihood that you're actually going to find a place for yourself and frankly, just mentally be in a better place to put yourself in those environments. There's a higher likelihood of that. So
yeah, I buy that. And the radical acceptance, that makes sense to me. I'm not that I'm very good at it, but no, I get it. But also, don't we need to put our hands on the steering wheel a little bit more as well? Meaning, I think if we're not really engaged in this moment, we'll get the AI that others want to give us or sell to us. I'm not sure how to do it yet, but I think we have a role to play in shaping the AI in some way, right? Maybe buying the AIs and paying for the AIs that we actually think are safe.
I was going to say, you put your money where your mouth is, you put your time where your values are. Exactly. And think about it. Companies, when they are thinking about where they can create money and profit, they're going to go where people want them to go. And so it's the same as voting. People assume, but I'm one person, right? What's my vote going to do? Well, if everybody thought that, then we'd have very different elections. And so the same is true in this moment. I love that idea, is actually the more active you are as a participant in this transformation, the more likely you can impact it and shape it.
Yeah. All right. Let's end there. Radical acceptance combined with hands on the steering wheel, your own AI steering wheel, vote with your wallet, choose the products and services in your lives. And for me, that means choose good AI.
Excellent. That's exactly right.
Julia, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Good luck with a stealth startup. Sounds like you see an opportunity to fix or improve some aspect of venture capital. So that seems like a good thing to do. So good luck with the stealth startup, and good luck with your Arsenal fandom.
Yes, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me and for such thoughtful questions. I think this is a conversation that could be hours long. And so hopefully see you guys again soon.
Likewise. Okay, as I expected, lots of great insights from Juliet. Here are the three that stood out for me. The first is that the bubble will probably burst, the AI investor bubble or valuation bubble, but the underlying capabilities and technologies that have been financed and built are much more valuable than mortgage-backed securities or websites that were built in the two previous recent bubbles when they burst. That these technologies are powerful, enduring, and not slowing down. Second thing, as an investor, what I took away is don't bet against Amazon. Very few companies make the jump to the next era of value creation. In fact, Microsoft is the only tech company that's been able to stay in the top 10 across two generations of disruption, if you will. And Juliet's point of view is Amazon's in that list today, top 10 most valuable company, and will likely make the jump and be a top 10 valuable company in 20 years. And then I loved her advice for all of us, which is be in the top 2 or 5% of your team, but it won't be as hard as you think. Like show up, give a shit, use AI every day, enhance and augment yourself with AI, and you'll likely be in the top 5% of your team or of your profession. And in that place, you'll be more valuable and economically very secure. If you want to follow along with Juliet's work and the launch of her new fund, you can find her on LinkedIn, and we've put the link in our show notes. Listen, thank you for listening to AI True Serum. Next episode, we'll be talking with Sangeet Chowdhury, author, AI strategist, and mentor to CEOs around the world. Sangeet thinks we're getting AI all wrong, and he has a point of view on how we can get it right. In the meantime, you can find me at gregshove.com, and don't forget to sign up to my newsletter. It's also code AI True Serum, and it's good. And if you've got a second right now, leave us a rating and review. It'd be a big help to the show, help people find us, and be a little bit validating for me. And as a Canadian, I need that every once in a while. Thanks. Talk soon.